In 2023, the Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly was held in Pittsburgh. General Assembly is a time when you gather together from across the world and sometimes other countries to be in community, to worship together, and to conduct the business of the association. One of the items for consideration at that year's General Assembly were the recommendations from the Article 2 Study Commission that involved a shift in the way that we presented our values of our UU faith. There was much discussion about this newly proposed value statements, both in formal contexts and meetings, and informal discussions among participants. And one morning, as I was leaving a session and making my way probably to the nearest coffee stand, I overheard a comment from one of the fellow participants who stated, "I'm just not sure I understand why we have to put love at the center of the other values. I mean, I don't have to love someone," they said, "and I don't even really have to like them to commit to be in covenant with them." Whenever I hear something like this or experience something that feels contrary to what I feel, I believe, I try to be curious about it. And so as I reflected on this statement, I asked myself, do I really indeed need to love someone to be in community with them? Is love essential to working for justice in our world? That depends, I decided, on what we mean when we talk about love. The subject of love is one that has been explored for centuries. It's been the subject of great works of art, of poetry, songs, and so much more. In the early Christian church, during the time when Christians were still wrestling with what it meant to call themselves a Christian, the Apostle Paul wrote of love in his letter to the church in Corinth. In his letter, he wrote that words that were spoken, actions engaged in, sacrifices made without love were meaningless. For Paul, love was also the starting place for all else. When I think about what it means to center love, Bell Hooks comes to mind. Bell Hooks was an African-American author, poet, feminist, professor, activist. And her book, All About Love, New Visions, redefines a vision of what love can be. One of the problems, she says, in talking about love is that we lack a common understanding of what we mean. When we talk about love, most of us refer to love as a feeling or a noun, something that we have, that we can possess. But Hooks challenges us to see love as a verb, as something that we do. In her book, she draws on the work of M. Scott Peck, who also echoed the words of Erich Fromm when Peck defined love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. And Hooks tells us that if the term spiritual is not something that resonates with you and with your theologies, to think instead of that dimension of our core reality where our mind, body, and spirit are one. Hooks writes that Peck continues to explain further. Love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love. We choose to love. When we think of love in this way, it is more than emotion, more than a feeling. Love is something that we can choose to engage in time and time again, even when we might not, and perhaps especially when we do not have feelings of love for someone. When we think of love in this way, Hooks reminds us that it naturally leads also to more accountability and more responsibility. We often think of the ways that we feel as being beyond our control. Something happens, a certain feeling rises in us, we can't control that. It is what we do next, however, how we respond, how we act, that we can control. We can choose to move forward from a place of love. We can act in ways that bring more equity and justice to our world. This way of thinking about love as something we do as action leads to what Bell Hooks calls an ethic of love, or a love ethic. A love ethic presupposes that everyone has the right to be free, to live fully and well. Commitment to a love ethic transforms our lives by offering us a different set of values to live by, she says. This idea, I think, is echoed by the Article 2 Study Commission, who saw this when they envisioned a new way for articulating our UU values. When they envisioned love firmly at the center. This process of examining and redefining our values is the embodiment of what it means to be a living tradition. As Unitarian Universalists, we are open to change, and we recognize that our understanding of our world and our place in it will shift over time. Not only do we acknowledge it, but we plan for it. The UUA bylaws call for a periodic re-examination of how we articulate this. This language has changed many times throughout our history. And this image has come to represent those values. When I reflect on this image that is also printed in our order of service each week, the idea of the ethic of love that Bell Hooks wrote about is what I too envision what it means when we say that we hold love at the center. The love ethic is the foundation for all else. It is the core. It is what holds everything else together. All of our other values flow from this place of love. The values of pluralism, generosity, interdependence, equity, justice, all flow out of a love ethic. But not only do they grow out of love, just as we see in this image, they are also held and embraced by love. If we think of love as a verb, as a way of showing up in the world, then love calls each of us to live these values in big and small ways each and every day. This is no small task. and it is not always easy, especially in today's world. My friend and UU minister, Reverend David Miller, writes, "In UU congregations all over the world, people gather together in an effort to live into, as best as we can, what we profess about placing love at the center of all we do." What a magnificent challenge. We are currently living in times baiting us not to love. The social and political atmosphere in which we travel insidiously tempts us to find fault, place blame, point fingers, and increase that which can tear us apart. And yet, we practice a faith, often imperfectly, because, after all, we are human. But we continue to practice a faith where we are called to answer the question, what is the most loving thing I can do right now? What an astounding challenge. What an unbelievably vital attempt. What an incredibly needed beacon for the future of us all. What is the most loving thing I can do right now? Love may be calling us to work towards repairing broken relationships, to engaging in difficult conversations. Love may be asking us to show up for justice in the streets, at the State House, at the school board meetings, with letter writing, at federal, state, and local levels. The protests in Minneapolis were and are love's response to the unjust treatment and killing of people at the hands of ICE agents. So also were the protests at the offices of Congress, where many interfaith leaders were arrested. Love may be calling us to see our religious neighbors as fellow travelers, seeking to make meaning in the world. Recently, I traveled to the Lincoln Memorial to see the monks as they neared the end of their walk for peace. As I stood in that space, that historic space, I was reminded that while I have a meditation practice, I strive to incorporate loving kindness, I am not a Buddhist. But love calls me to recognize the beauty, the wisdom, the commitment of that tradition and those people who made this journey in the name of peace. There is so much that we can learn from one another if we're willing to engage in conversations, to be open and curious. Love also calls us to care for our earth, to see that we are all interconnected, not just to one another, but also to this planet. Each of us has a part to play in caring for the earth. This congregation just recently raised funding, applied for grants, and committed to installing solar panels. This is an example of this congregation's commitment to climate justice, and it is an act of love. Love may also be calling us to care for those within our community, to show them that they are seen, that they are heard, that they are known. Love asks us to care for those who may be sick or hurting, those who are struggling and in need of support in whatever way that may show up. And we do this not to make ourselves feel better, but rather to let others know that they are not alone. Sometimes love calls us simply to be present, to witness the story, the pain, the experience of another. And love may be calling us right now to care for ourselves. There are times when the next most loving thing we can do is simply, no, not simply. Sometimes it's hard to know that we need to take time to tend to our own needs. Those are the moments when all we can do is care for our own selves. And this, too, is an act of love. Love also asks us to work for equity and transformation in our world. Equality and equity are two very different things. Equality means that everyone receives the same thing. On the surface, this seems like a good idea, but not everyone begins in the same place. Generations of a system that prioritized and centered the experience of one group over another has left a world in which opportunities are not the same for everyone. Instead, equity means that we all get what we need to thrive. You may have seen this image, this way of representing the difference between equality and equity. And recently, I've seen this one floating around. The idea that liberation is when we completely remove the barriers. This is what we're working for. In 2025, Skinner House published a book titled Love at the Center, Unitarian Universalist Theologies. Some of you may be familiar with this book as it was the UUA Common Read last year, and it is edited by the current Unitarian Universalist Association president, the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt. This book is a collection of what it means to hold love at the center. It's short essays written by UUs, some in ministry professionals and some lay people. It is an excellent source if this is something that you want to continue to explore more. And this morning, I want to focus on one of the essays written by the Reverend Michael Slack. Reverend Michael currently serves the congregation in Rockville, Maryland as an associate minister. And Reverend Michael writes that perhaps naming love as our central value is a deep expression of longing, more than it is anything exacting or clear. If longing is the spiritual and emotional tug of love, then risk-taking is the tangible, accountable embodiment of love. A faithful embodiment of love at the center isn't a check the box and move on kind of endeavor. Instead, it is a prepare a place for those who've not yet arrived kind of effort. Love focuses us on what our values require of us instead of the words we choose to express them. Faithful embodiment of our values is about impact on relationships and community building and bridging the gaps between who we are right now and who we are called to be. It is not always easy or comfortable to respond to what love asks of us, and there are often risks involved. But love, the kind of love that calls to us, the love that is a verb, the love that is sometimes gentle and quiet and sometimes loud and raucous. This love calls us to build a better tomorrow, to take risks and step into the discomfort. It calls us to see humanity in one another. It calls us to prepare that place for those who have yet to arrive. And it calls us to know that we will fall short of our highest aspirations. And that is okay. It is in those moments that we practice humility and grace, that we love one another in spite of all that we wish were different, that we ask ourselves again, what is the most loving thing I can do right now? In closing today, I want to leave you with a few more words from Love at the Center, written by Connie Goodbread. May we, in times of despair, find hope. May we, in times of chaos, find clarity. May we, in times of hatred, find love. May we, in times of fear, find joy. Choosing joy, love, clarity, hope is an act of loving defiance. May we know that love holds and surrounds us. May we know that we are a part of a greater love. May we never succumb to the divisions meant to isolate, oppress, leave us hopeless. May we always draw the circle ever wider. May it be so.